Well, hello everyone to another edition of Parent to Parent. Ooh, I have my guest right here already. You guys know I do this on my own, and we all do it controlling, all of this stuff here behind the scenes. So I'm gonna wait, Rick, to introduce you. I was just gonna talk to the fellow people myself. We're talking about school. Oh, there's Mark Coleman. He's one of our producers. Amazing producer here. So we're going to talk about something that affects so many people. I've talked about it in this live stream so many times: mental health and anxiety, depression, just normalizing all of it, how to find people to help you, how to deal with it yourself. Our children are dealing with it at young ages. You all know, because I talk about it, my son, I have a son and daughter, 5 and 2. My son is going to kindergarten. I have the handbook right over here. It's happening, guys. And I am okay. I just keep telling myself I'm okay. It's going to be okay. It's just a me problem. But, one thing that I've learned through doing parent to parent and also reading is an obvious thing, but the energy that you give off is the energy that the child is going to receive. So if I'm a nervous wreck, the child's going to be like, oh, what's going on? But if I'm excited, which I really am, genuinely am, it's just, I don't get to see you all day long, which is like, it's going to be okay. I don't see my mom all day long, but I'm a lot older now. So, I think I have one of the best people to talk to about this, because I didn't even know this organization existed, and you might not either. And it's called SAD, and here is the website. And what they do, actually, the mission is right here: empowering and mobilizing students and adult allies to engage in positive change through leadership and smart decision making, which is so important. Now, I want to bring in the president of SAD, which is Students Against Destructive Decisions, to really further explain what this organization is about. So now it's your turn, Rick, to talk. So thank you so much for joining us. First off, tell me more about this organization, because it is so amazing that this is out there, and it might be a resource that many people don't know about.
Right. Well, first of all, thanks so much for having me. It's great to be with you this evening. SAD's been around for 4 decades. Folks might remember us as Students Against Drunk Driving. We were started back in the 80s with a singular focus on ending alcohol-impaired driving crashes. But in the late 90s, our students came to us and said, hey, we still think that alcohol-impaired driving is a critical issue, but there are so many other risks and pressures that we're facing as young people: bullying, eating disorders, mental health, tobacco education, illicit drugs, prescription drugs. The list goes on and on. And so our students were looking for resources and expertise to help them be able to combat these risks and pressures, the ones they face in their daily lives. So at the request of our students, we changed our name to be Students Against Destructive Decisions. Now, with a national network of about 8,500 chapters in middle schools, high schools, and colleges, we use a peer-to-peer approach to do just what you said: engage young people and adult allies so that they can make better decisions and they can work together to keep young people safe.
What do you think? I mean, in light of the pandemic, because this has really put a lot of pressure on parents and children,
Yeah.
how do you sort of get out of this? I don't want to call it rut, because it's kind of like obviously a negative connotation, but I guess this just kind of mental state that you've never found yourself in before. How do you kind of navigate your way out?
I've heard so many of us calling it the new normal, right? Trying to think about how we exist in a post-COVID world, still understanding that COVID's going to be around for a while to come. And there's still going to be risks and pressures, and there's still going to be nuances and new variants. So I think the first thing to do is reckon with those feelings that we feel. You described it as anxiety and depression. And I think trying to understand what those things look like is really the first key for parents. Many of us grew up in an era where, it was kind of pull yourself up by the bootstraps and kind of figure it out, right? Well, now we want to talk to young people about how to recognize those signs and symptoms so that they feel prepared to not only identify what they're feeling, but then be able to respond to put themselves in a better position of mental health. A few weeks back, the Center for Disease Control and Prevention released a study that found that 1 in 4 students across our country right now are dealing with a diagnosable mental health condition, whether that be anxiety, bipolarism, depression, the list goes on and on. And so the first step is to identify those feelings, to have a conversation with your young person to help them identify what those feelings are, then to develop coping mechanisms and other resources to be able to process those emotions. We have a whole toolkit on this. It's on our website under our parents and adult ally corners that folks can download absolutely at no charge to be able to start that conversation with their kiddos as they go back to school, just like they would going down the school supply list. We think it's so important to have these conversations, but to keep them ongoing throughout the whole year ahead.
And how do you start a conversation like that?
Yeah, it can start with a feeling phrase. You can open up and be vulnerable and say, I know you might be feeling this, with kindergarten just around the corner, saying, I'm feeling anxious. I'm feeling nervous. I'm feeling upset. How are you feeling? To be able to start that conversation with those feelings, it sounds kind of elementary, but it actually is so critical to be able to create a space where young people can describe those feelings without fear of blame, without fear of judgment, and then be able to talk about, well, when you're feeling this way, how do you handle that? How do you handle pressure? How do you handle stress? How do you handle that anxiety? We've got a list of over 20 activities that teens and parents can do together, from deep breathing exercises to working on hobbies together, to obviously having more serious conversations about when these things escalate, to when you want to engage in getting help from a mental health care provider or a primary care physician. Obviously, there are steps along the way, and mental health is a spectrum. So we want to make sure that folks are able to identify where they are on that spectrum and then be able to take the appropriate steps to keep themselves and their kids safe.
Finding these resources, I mean, it's great because, your website has free resources. For a lot of families, they either don't have the time to find someone or they're not able to find someone because, as you know, there's a waiting list to talk to a professional mental health expert. So what do you recommend they do? Because you kind of have to just take it upon yourself as a parent on top of all the other things. But this needs to be, just like you said, and I'm so glad you said it, like the school supply list, going through this. That's kind of how you have to think about it.
Yeah, I know many of our parents, not only do they, go through that school supply list, but I remember going to my annual physical, checking with my doctor before the school year started, before that academic season or that athletic season started. I think it's a great opportunity for parents to do the same kind of check-in with their teens' mental health or with their middle schoolers' mental health. Obviously, you want to be age appropriate, but having that same kind of mentality of, okay, we're checking their heart, we're checking their lungs. Are we checking what's going on inside their mind and how they're processing the reality around them? These are scary times. Like you said, I feel my chest tightening. I feel my eyes getting wider. I feel that anxiety myself as an adult when I look at the state of the economy, the ongoing pandemic, discourse abroad, political tensions here at home, the violence in our schools and in our streets. When you try to process that as a 14, 15, 16-year-old or as an elementary kiddo, it's imaginable how you would process that. So just like you're beginning to go to the doctor to do that physical, do the same thing with a mental health checklist. In our toolkit, we have a checklist where you can start to be able to identify what are some of those signs and symptoms. When you see things like, changes in attitudes and behavior, maybe changes in appetite, that's certainly when you want to start the conversation. Obviously, if you see teens having any sort of signs of physical harm, or they talk about hurting themselves, they're being more reclusive, or you hear friends starting to share concerns, that's when you want to definitely talk with a mental health care provider or your primary care physician. There are many resources within our schools and our communities that sometimes we don't know exist that are free and accessible. We mentioned those in the toolkit, including the new 988 phone number. It's important that folks grab their cell phone, put that in the phone. It's the new National Suicide Prevention and Response Hotline that's free to access at any point. If you're a parent and you're worried about your kiddo, you're worried about your teen, worried about your adult child, you can call that number at any point for free access to a trained healthcare provider who can give you some insight and guidance on how to respond to the situation you're having. Obviously, it's best if that person makes the call, but maybe they're not quite ready to do that. This is a great opportunity for you to be able to intercede on their behalf and be able to get some guidance on how you can best support them. But obviously, and ultimately realizing that they have to take some steps on their own accord to take care of their mental health, just like we all have to do with our physical health.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I was going to say, middle school, high school, it's during that time, as I remember, and you may remember yourself, I wasn't exactly as open with my parents.
Yeah.
That's just not cool in my mind. And I'm sure that's the same, like, let me talk about my feelings kind of thing. So
Yeah,
you kind of
right.
shut yourself off. You just like, nothing's wrong with me. I'm fine. I don't want to talk about it. When you have
Right.
that kind of barrier that's put up, how do you try
Yeah.
to break that down?
So the first thing I recommend to parents is consider the setting, right? A lot of those conversations that you just described happen when you first walk in the door. You've got your book bag over your shoulder. How was your day? Fine. What'd you learn? Nothing. Those kinds of things. But if you can engage your young person in a more, I'll call it more intimate or more lighthearted environment, depending on how your teen responds, that setting can make all the difference. I encourage parents and teens try to set up some sort of regular routine. Maybe it's a hobby you do together. Maybe it's hey, every Sunday we're going to go grab a cup of coffee at Starbucks together. Every Wednesday night, that's ice cream night. Maybe it's, we're going to watch our favorite show. And then during those dang commercial breaks, you can integrate some of this conversation. When you're watching media, maybe you're streaming your favorite show and you see something on TV that maybe sparks the conversation. Hey, like I saw that person was pretty anxious. They talked about feeling anxious or they said they were depressed. Have you ever felt that way? Would you know what to do if you did feel that way? There are ways that you can really make the setting far more open to where those feelings can be shared, but also still have that genuine and authentic conversation. Gen Z is all about authenticity. So I think the more that you can be vulnerable, if you feel comfortable sharing that the stressors and the anxiety that you feel in your day or when you were a young person, that authenticity goes a long way with this generation.
I think that's so important too. And, for a lot of cultures, I would say mine included, my whole family's from
Mm-hmm.
India, and I'm the first one born and brought up
Mm-hmm.
here. And so
Yeah.
there's this like, and it's a lot of, I can speak to this just because I've seen it firsthand. A lot of Asian cultures where it's like mental health is like, that's not even a thing. Like that you just kind of
Right.
suck it up. We're not just do good in school. That's all we, ask for
Yeah.
you. Like we don't feel feelings kind of thing. And it's seriously,
Mhm.
that's kind of what it is. And, you're not going to have a mental health. You don't need medicine. This is all a gimmick. This is all. So that's kind of a hard kind of environment to be in. And
Yeah.
I make it a point to, because I feel like my parents didn't really know any better because that's how they were taught. And that's how, that. So it's
Sure.
like this cyclic pattern. And I've definitely made it a point to not be that way. And
Yeah.
I'm always checking in. Can you talk about how important it is to set aside the time? Because yes, parents, I feel like do feel I'm so busy. I have this going on, that going on, but it's so
Mhm.
important to know that your child is happy and okay. And
Yep.
sometimes that resource is right at home. And
Yeah.
do you ever see that when dealing with those type of cultures that that's the issue that the child is kind of facing up against?
Absolutely. I mean, I think there are many cultures, many regions of our country still today that face
Mhm.
this challenge of ignoring the fact that mental health is just as important as physical health. And I keep bringing it back to that because I think it's a nice parallel. I've done talks and I've talked with parents and said, if your kiddo had fallen and broken their arm, you wouldn't say, it's a gimmick. Just pull yourself up by your bootstraps. You'd address the root cause of that. You'd get some help, maybe some
Right.
physical therapy. There will be multiple steps to taking care of that. So I think the first advice I give to our teens and to our students who may be watching is that there's a lot that we can do to address our mental health and to put up barriers or safeguards, if you will, to protect our mental health, setting boundaries in relationships that we have, being mindful of the media we're consuming, using our smart devices and technology to be an aid in doing deep breathing exercises, meditations, yoga, physical activity, diet, all those things, including, I will especially drive home the idea of sleep. One of the number one influences of mental health, there's a correlation between mental health and how many hours of sleep we're getting a night. Obviously, as your sleep decreases, so does your mental health. And so many of our teens have had weird and wacky schedules as they've been
Mhm.
off this summer. As they go back, it's so important for all of us to set up routines that prioritize sleep hygiene. That obviously has a direct impact on our mental health. So my first piece of advice is control things that you can control, and set those parameters in place to set yourself up for success in your mental health. But I also realize, as my second point, that sometimes we can't do it alone, and that's okay. The most important thing is to ask for help. I have found very few parents who have said, wow, if I knew that my kiddo, my son, my daughter, my child were in pain or not succeeding, I would not want to intervene and do what was in their best interest. So I think, again, it's about teens and young people feeling empowered to go to whomever might be at home and say, hey, I'm not feeling okay, and here's what I'm feeling. Then parents obviously have a role to take that next step, and we'll talk about that here in a moment. Perhaps there isn't that support at home. Perhaps there's a lack of that support, and that's okay. There are other resources in our communities, our school counselors, teachers, law enforcement, and many of our mental health providers that are based in our community associations and organizations. They're also designed to be there as a resource. Also, don't forget about church clergy and other spiritual leaders who can oftentimes be a trusted resource, much like a coach or other people. The biggest thing is that you seek out help and you continue to find resources. And if all else fails, you know that you have that 988 phone number that you can call anytime to get that support. So I think it's about, not just looking at our ethnic cultures, but also looking at our culture as a whole and really working to remove the stigma. That's something that SADD does every day, and something that our 400,000 members are doing each and every day to try to make better known those resources and make sure teens get them before it's too late.
Yeah, I think that's so important. And one thing that you brought in, one thing that I kind of learned through all this too, because I do suffer from anxiety, and I have since I was a teenager, and is just like you said with, it's different because, I am the media. So like, that's my job. I can't get away from all this stuff, but I've had to really learn to just unplug. Like I need those detoxes, and, I have to give the news because, people need to know what's going on, but you can't hide from the reality. You just need to be able to check in with yourself. That's like, how am I feeling? Everybody, whether you're a parent or not, was affected by Uvalde. Like that was huge.
Absolutely.
Just, so being a parent or not, you're just kind of like trying to process what the heck is going on, trying to explain to your child who might be watching it or seeing your expression. So I was going to ask you, and this is one of the questions that came up, how can parents learn to speak with their children about mental health and difficult topics? I know we've gone over the mental health, so about these difficult topics.
Yeah, so the first resource I'll point out is that we have a toolkit called Are We Safe? It's a talking point for parents very specifically to talk about school violence, and not just violence that's happening in our schools, but really throughout our communities, places that we always thought were safe, houses of worship, shopping centers, movie theaters, schools, have all seen, horrific acts of violence in the not so distant past. So there are a number of things that, again, just like we talked about mental health, there are things that parents can do to start that conversation. And first, I would, again, stress to not think of this as a one and done conversation, but make sure it's framed in an ongoing set of moments where you're talking with your teen about these elements. First, as we're getting ready to go back to school, yes, certainly in the wake of this horrific tragedy, say, hey, I'm a little bit nervous about you going back to school. Do you feel that way? And then pause and wait and see where the conversation goes. If they say yes, there are talking points on how to talk through framing the conversation. Obviously, we don't want kiddos to feel that they're not going to be safe, but we have to deal with the reality that there is a chance they might not be. So we have conversations on, hey, what are the practical steps that parents and kids can take as we go back to school? What are things that we can do from an active shooter learning perspective to be better prepared? But also, how can we wrestle with that unknown? And one of the things that I stress to parents is to never be afraid to say, I'm scared too, and I don't have the answer. Certainly, we know that there is an expectation that we put on ourselves as parents that we do have all the answers to why the sky is blue and why the chicken crossed the road and everything else. But, we can't always answer all of the challenges that we face. And having that conversation with your kiddo is so important so that they can better understand the complexity of these issues, but then also again learn how to develop coping skills, which is something
Mhm.
that I think is so important because they are going to face stress, they are going to face anxiety, they're going to face the unknown. And so coming up with strategies on how to handle that in a way that works for them and in a way that processes the environment around them, which is ever so changing, is absolutely so important.
That's so important. I'm trying to put the website up. Rick, I'm going to ask you before we go, what is the big takeaway from parents that you want to kind of impart to all of our viewers? One thing I do want to say is, you know, to parents out there that may think this is all kind of too much, or I would argue that the time now is so much harder to grow up in than when we grew up and when our parents grew up, and all that, in light of social media, Instagram,
Mm-hmm.
being compared all the time to other people, and just the peer pressure. And not saying that, before it wasn't hard. I would just say that there's more layers to it now. And I don't think it's going away, especially with TikTok and all these other things.
Right.
And so I would just really encourage parents to check in with themselves maybe first, to see why you may feel that way, and then just take it upon yourself to check in with your child, and your child might just be surprised that you're asking them. It's a question that they may not feel you would ever care to know about. So just from my perspective and kind of like the background I came from, I just think that that's very important. But yeah, Rick, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I mean, I think you bring some interesting points. We live in a day and age when we have never been more connected. You can push a button and literally reach millions of people as we're doing right now. But we find that more and more often our young people, our students, our kiddos are telling us that they've never felt more alone, especially in the wake of COVID-19. So my advice to parents is, make sure you're setting up safe parameters around these. Make sure
Mhm.
you're setting up guidelines. We have resources around our Text Less, Live More program that talks about how we can end digital dependency. It's scary, the number of young people who are reporting that this is the last thing they look at before bed and the first thing they look at in the morning. And so when we build our lives around a social construct, it really does create some dangerous nuances, and it does create some unique challenges that we have to face. And of course, like everything, our wellness is a pyramid. When we start to affect one component, the whole house starts to shatter. So we're here to help. We're here to be a resource. We have chapters all throughout the area that you can connect with at your local school. You can find your state contact for the region and for your local chapters at our website, www.sad.org. We want to make sure we help every young person and every parent embrace the bright future they so deserve.
That is so awesome. Well, Rick, thank you so much for your time. And that's the website right there. And I just think it's such an important topic. And hopefully we'll be able to talk soon, because I know that this is an ongoing challenge for so many. So thank you so much again. And I want to thank you for joining us on this edition of Parent to Parent. I'll let you know how everything goes with first day of school. But for now,